Also joined us. If you wanted to go ahead and say hello, we can make sure we can hear you. Senator Pope, I'm not sure if you said anything. It's showing that you're connected to audio. Hi, Barry. Thank you for joining us a few minutes early.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
I'm fine. How are you all?
Hi, Edward. Perfect. We can hear both of you and see both of you. Thank you. Senator Pope, we haven't heard yet from you, so I'm not sure if you've said anything. If you want to say good afternoon, we can see if your audio is working. Hi, Dr. Peace.
Good afternoon.
Great, we can hear you. Thank you for joining a few minutes early for us to test your audio. And Senator Pope, we still haven't heard from you, and I don't know if we're having any issues connecting. So if you wanted to say hello or good afternoon, I'm not sure if you're hearing us on our end.
I think I saw his picture a little while ago.
See his picture, but we don't hear his voice. Senator Pope, can you hear us?
I'm gonna reach out to his assistant. Hold on.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, we're going to text or email and see if we can work on audio.
Hey, Barry, we don't have to wear our masks for this one.
Barry, we muted you. I'm sorry.
No, you're right, Mike, but I got mine handy here just in case it's transmitted through the Ethernet, internet, whatever, the cloud.
All right, we've had a few additional task force members join us. If you wanted to say hello, Dr. Petrie, if you wanted to say hello, and Bruce, if you wanted to say hello, we can test your audio.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me just fine.
We can. Thank you. Great to see you.
Yeah, thanks.
Senator Pope, if you wanted to say hello, I think we've got you connected now.
Ma'am,
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
We're working great. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Hi, Dr. Hicks. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. If you want to say hello, we can make sure we can hear you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My colleague, Dr. Terry Johnson, is going to join us for this meeting. Wave, Terry. So we hope y'all can see and hear us well.
Thank you very much. We've begun our live stream and we'll get started in about 1 or so minutes. Great. We are about to get started. Dr. Pope, we can hear you. I hear a little background. If you wanted to go ahead, task force members, go ahead and turn on camera. We are live streaming. I have right at 1 p.m. So we are going to go ahead and get started. And I'll now transition over to Commissioner Kim Hunter-Reid to get us started today.
Well, thank you, Malin. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see all of you. Unfortunately, we had to do this by Zoom yet again, but we got to keep you safe while we figure out how to get more great educators in our classroom. So just delighted that you all have joined us for our second Teacher Recruitment, Recovery, and Retention Task Force. I hope all of you had a great weekend and everyone's healthy and doing well. But before we begin our virtual meeting, I want to begin with a few reminders. First, please stay on mute unless you're speaking to avoid any background noise. Second, we are live streaming. That is in progress. All public members who are watching the live stream, we welcome you to send comments at webinar@laregents.edu. we'll look forward to any public comments and sharing those with our task force. So to get us started, let me ask Kara to call the roll.
All right. Representative Mark Wright. Dr. Esram Petrie.
Present.
M. LeBlanc Cooper. Here. Dr. Kim Hunter Reed.
Here.
Dr. Janet Poe.
She's there.
Here.
Dr. Karen Peace.
Here.
Ms. Sandy Holloway. Mr. Mike Falk.
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Bruce Chapin.
Here.
Dr. Paula Calderon.
Present.
Ms. Kenyatta Williams. Mr. Edward Parks.
Present.
Ms. Gladys Mouton.
I'm here.
Mr. Barry Irwin.
Here.
Mr. Alex Durrell.
Here.
Senator Pope. Here. Representative Buddy Mincy. We have a quorum.
Oh, thank you, Kara. So now I'll ask for a motion to approve the July 13th, 2020 minutes. Those have been sent to you prior to the meeting. Can I receive a motion and a second to approve the task force minutes? A motion by Barry, second by Mike Falk. Any discussion? Any opposition? Motion carries. Thank you. As we discussed at our first meeting, the theme for today's meeting is around recruitment of teachers. We have, I think, some excellent content for today, and we heard you. We have deans on the call, and we wanted to make sure that we started this conversation today really getting information from you. So my co-chair, Barry Irwin, suggested that we survey the task force members, and I'd like to ask Malin if she would provide the highlights of the overview of the task force surveys. Malin?
Thank you, Dr. Reed. So this survey that I'm going to share out some results. Thank you so much to the task force members who contributed and provided their thoughts to these responses. It was really designed to get your thoughts specific to recruitment in advance of today's meeting, especially acknowledging our shift to virtual. We wanted to hear from all of your opinions related to this topic as we will kind of dive into topics at each meeting. And so thank you for those of you who completed this survey, providing your insights and opinions specific to teacher recruitment and some of the barriers that are present and those ideas and solutions that you have over ways we can overcome some of the challenges specific to recruitment. So if we go into the next slide, I'm just going to provide a high-level overview of some of your responses. The first question on the survey had you identify the importance level of the factors that contribute to becoming a teacher. And if we look at this response, blue is what was indicated as very important. And it is definitely obvious that as a task force, a desire to work with children is a very important level that contributes to becoming a teacher. Next is an influence of another teacher. And then followed closely by teacher salary and status of teacher were some of the thoughts that you shared in relation to the factors that contribute to becoming the teacher. And so if we go to the next slide, the next question really was you identifying where does the responsibility of recruitment rest? So if we look at the blue graph, which is indicating a high responsibility. Your responses really indicated that you're saying the responsibility lies within individual schools, colleges, as well as school districts. And then in orange, some of the responsibility you indicated or noted that some of that responsibility lies in business and industry, professional teacher organizations, parent organizations, or community-based. And so this kind of really corresponds well with today, what we're going to be diving into, hearing from deans of colleges of education, as well as some district representation in today's meeting and agenda. So if we go to the next slide, the next question on the survey were, what are some of the obstacles that are discouraging qualified individuals from entering the teaching profession? So as you see in blue here, that indicates the largest obstacles. And so the two larger obstacles being that you identified as status of teacher and teacher salaries. Some of those themes came up at our first meeting. And then it was also followed closely by working conditions. And so as someone who is a former teacher myself, I would say I often think about the luxury of having a lunch compared to a teacher who oftentimes joins their students with lunch. That could be one of those contributing factors is working conditions. And then a medium obstacle that I do think is interesting to note, which was talked about in the first meeting, which is peer support. So if we go to the next slide, we added some open-ended responses that you provided your thoughts on. And the first open-ended question was, what are the impacts do teacher preparation program entrance requirements have on the recruitment of teachers? And so these are some of your responses summarized. Several of you indicated Praxis core as a barrier, or also the costs associated, and that could be fees also could also kind of overlap into Praxis. And then there were a couple comments about the need to review other state colleges of education requirements. And so if we go to the next slide, the question was, what are some of the completion requirements? What impacts do the completion requirements have? There were comments around the year-long residency, compensation for teacher residents, grade point average, again, Praxis exams, and alternate certification programs as also impacting the completion requirements. And the last few slides is definitely a great launching point for the rest of our meeting today is what are some of the recruitment strategies the task force recommends. And so I'm gonna list them off. There's 3 of these slides. You had some great recommendations as we consider kind of the recommendations moving forward. One of those recommendations being funding for tuition. For every semester that is funded, a requirement to teach 1 year in a Louisiana public or private school or repay the money, higher salaries, better working conditions, positive messaging about teaching, mentoring program residency, extensive professional development, sign-on bonuses with in-depth assistance from veteran teachers, school tours, and my assumption that could be school tours both on the K-12 as well as higher education side, presentations in classes, including content area courses, and then community presentations, including church and service organizations. So if we go to the next slide, these strategies that you recommended continue, enrollment opportunities for high school students, starting to plant the seeds for future educators early as elementary school, clear employee value proposition, including but not limited to compensation, and leveraging current teachers and or students. And then there was also several comments again around student teaching, and in this case as short as 1 semester. And then they continue removing the value added model or VAM, working with various districts to create a pipeline for incoming teachers, create programs designed specifically for teachers that would like to work in an urban district, and targeted messages for minorities and males into teaching. And so those are just a few of your thoughts. I'll definitely pause there before I transition over to Dr. Reed. Those were the task force members' thoughts for strategies related to recruitment of teachers.
Thank you, Malin. Are there comments, questions about the items? Barry, I want to start with you. I know you really wanted to make sure we heard from the task force. Just curious about any observations on your part.
Yeah, well, thank you. I do have a couple of questions, and I don't want to take up a lot of time at the very beginning, but just a couple of things for my clarification. Number one, when we're talking about teacher salaries, I recall that we used to have a real structure in terms of teacher salaries that were in place really across the state. And I'm just trying to, and I've also heard, I seem to remember, and I could be totally wrong on this, that Are teachers in the early years actually either, have a greater growth in their salary potential in the early years than they do later? And I was just wondering if somebody could kind of give us what the framework of teacher salaries are. Is there a statewide framework? Is it individual by district? I'm just not clear anymore.
I can help answer that question if y'all would allow me.
Thank you, Mike.
Barry, before we went to the student pupil driven formula, the state had a teacher salary schedule, and they paid all the teachers the same across the state. You were allotted a certain number of teachers in elementary and high school and all. So when we shift to a pupil driven formula, then the districts would use the funding to pay the teacher salaries and pay them what they could afford. So your districts that had revenue coming in could pay teachers a little bit more than your poor districts, even though they were getting a higher percentage. And then we went to the various levels where you could pay for need, for degree, for experience. And you're right, the beginning teachers proportionately, the increase in their salaries in the earlier years was at a higher percentage with the step increase than maybe a teacher that was at 25 or 30 years. So you're right, there was some of that going on. And when they paid for the teacher salaries, the state did, they also paid for the retirement portion that went to the teacher's retirement system.
Got it. Thanks. And actually I have two other questions, and they're kind of related, I guess, in a way. And it comes with the recruitment piece of it. One that stuck out to me was the issue, and Malin, you touched on it a little bit about working conditions. I'm just curious, what is the perception, do you think, of working conditions if you're in high school looking to go to a college of education and get into that, or if you're in a college of education? I'm just wondering, I understand the working conditions piece as somebody who's already working in the environment, but I'm just wondering what the perception our folks think is of the working conditions for folks who haven't really started teaching yet.
I can maybe step in and answer that a little bit, seeing that I deal with that every day. The working conditions that they're talking about, Mr. Irwin, would be in the last, and I'll say this, since the accountability system came into play, we are asking much, much more of our teachers as far as what they're being graded on, what the expectations are, which is, and I'm not saying that's not a good thing to have high expectations, but they're asked to do so much more. But in the past years, we've not seen a pay increase to reflect what we're asking them to do. With the addition, accountability brought around SLTs. It brought about increased scrutiny on what was happening as far as detailed lesson plans are concerned. Teachers are having to spend many, many hours at home away from the school where they're paid on their 7.5-hour day. Many of them are being chastised because they're not spending, quote, enough time over the summer, which they're not paid for, to get ready for the coming school year when new curriculums are adopted. Those are the types of things that I'm hearing as a personnel director, that there are a lot more responsibilities being placed on them, but yet the pay is not commensurate to what they're being asked to do. There's not many professions that I'm aware of that ask their employees to do more without actually compensating them for that. And you're starting to hear, you never heard that argument before, but you're really starting to hear that come about now that, COVID has brought about teaching online more. They're having to do that at home at night, and so that conversation of, well, you're asking me to do all this extra work, but teachers aren't allowed overtime. And so that's kind of the working conditions that I'm hearing at our level.
And thanks. And this gets into my other question, honestly. And I really get that. I understand that. I guess what I'm trying to get at is these questions came up under recruitment. And what I'm trying to figure out is to what degree people who are being recruited know about VAM, for instance, know about SLTs, know about accountability, know about all of those issues before they're even, in the classroom.
In my opinion, they're hearing this in the public. They're hearing this from fellow teachers. They're, and unfortunately, and this is a conversation that we've had a little bit, unfortunately, fellow teachers are not encouraging people to get into education, or those that are in education that are coming into their classroom through methods classes. The universities require students to do methods work, which may require them to go into the classroom a couple of times a week during a semester. And they're hearing this and seeing this on a regular basis inside the everyday workings of a classroom. So they're hearing it from their fellow or from their peers that you do not want to get into this because this is what you're going to be expected to do, but you're not compensated for it. That's what we're starting to hear.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else on your list, Barry?
Not on this part.
Got it. Thank you. I have a question. I don't know if anyone else has a question. I have a question about status of teachers. And I've heard this in multiple states that I've worked in about elevating the teacher profession and status of teachers. I wonder if someone could speak to what does it look like to effectively elevate the status of teachers? Anyone?
Can I mention, and I know I'm talking a lot, so somebody step in and stop me.
Go ahead, Bruce.
All right. This is when I talk about this, the accountability system has brought about a system where the media grabs a hold of those districts or those schools that may not be performing at the highest level. And when they report on that, they lump everybody into one category. Teachers aren't doing this. Teachers aren't doing that. And I'll say this, we're not hearing the same conversation coming from this current superintendent, but we did hear that over and over again, how bad Louisiana was performing. Over and over again, we heard that. And we heard multiple times from the media that schools in Louisiana are terrible. We need to change this or change that. But there are a lot of factors other than test scores that determine how well a child or a school or a district does in school performance scores. And the fact that we use letter grades to determine the success of a school or a teacher, to me, is ludicrous. And if I've offended somebody there, I apologize. But here's the thing. The status of teachers, people are talking about how bad education is, how bad teachers are, when there are certain schools maybe that have issues that need to be addressed, but everybody's being lumped into one category of being bad when that is not the norm across this state of Louisiana. So when you hear the media latch on to certain aspects, then everybody starts participating in those conversations at how bad teachers are. Well, and I'll get off my box here in a second. Social media helps play into that because every district's got a rant and raves page. Well, the parents and even business people will get on those sites and talk about a certain thing that's happening in their district, and that just adds to how bad teachers are, when it may not even be true what they're talking about. But we in the leadership positions can't, for obvious reasons, get on those social media sites and defend ourselves. We have to tell our stories on social media, because if we don't, others are going to tell it for us. but that status of teachers, we have to start changing the narrative as
Right.
leaders and business people. You know, HR guys like myself have to go to, business in the communities, to the different civic organizations and give presentations on how great this profession is. Because the profession itself, the teachers, the people in those classrooms are amazing people that want to do best for their kids. And we get lost because a school has a C or a school has a D. We get lost in really, truly what great things are happening in those schools because the media only wants to talk about the bad things that are happening when there are many more good things. And I'll be quiet.
I don't want you to get quiet, Bruce, but thank you very much. I appreciate that clarification about the status of teachers, lifting the profession, making sure the peers are also talking about, and great teachers are talking about how great it is to be a teacher and how amazing it would be for a talented student to be a teacher. So I appreciate that. Are there other questions before we transition to the next item? Don't see any hands raised. So, okay, thank you again for your responses to the survey. Barry, thank you as co-chair for coming up with that great idea that we get an early read of where everybody is. Very helpful. Our next agenda item is to look at the data on enrollment and completion from our public colleges and colleges of education here in Louisiana, as of course, we're talking about recruitment of teachers today. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Craig to provide an overview. Susanna?
Great, thank you, Commissioner Reed. Next slide, please. So based on the recommendation of members of this committee, the Board of Regents reviewed 10 years of enrollment and completer data, and we disaggregated these data by ethnicity, race, and gender. And so basically wanted to provide you with a snapshot of what's happening in enrollment versus completion over the last 10 years. So if we take a look at the graph that you're seeing in front of you today, in 2011, we had 17,898 students enrolled in teacher preparation programs across the state. You can see what we've done. We've divided these data. The gray line is white, non-Hispanic. The blue line is Black, non-Hispanic. The orange line is Hispanic, and the yellow line is all other. And so if we take a look at these data, and we can look that first of all, there's a decline in total enrollment of over 5,000 students over the last 10 years. And these are those that are enrolled in teacher preparation programs. But for the white non-Hispanic, there's a significant decrease, approximately 4,200 decrease. For Black non-Hispanic, there's a moderate decrease, which is approximately 1,100 students. And the Hispanic students, as well as all other students, is primarily static and has remained constant throughout the course of the last 10 years. But one of the things to note is, and I think you're going to begin to see a theme throughout this, is there is a great divide in the number of students, even in the decrease in completers. We have many more white non-Hispanic students who are completing their, who are enrolling in their programs in comparison to the other three categories. Next slide. This particular slide graph compares the percentage of total enrollment by race and ethnicity. And we took a look at the orange bar is fall of 2011. The blue bar is fall of 2020. You can see that in fall of 2020, there was a bit of an increase in comparison of Black non-Hispanic. an increase in Hispanic and a small increase in all others, which in direct relationship to that was a decrease in the white non-Hispanic. But look at the difference in percentages. 61.7% of the total enrollment is white non-Hispanic. In comparison to the next is black, non-Hispanic at 25%. So there is definitely a disconnect or barriers to teachers or students of color choosing to enroll in teacher preparation programs. Let's look to the next slide, please. This is your teacher enrollment by an ethnicity and race over the last 10 years. Nope.
Gender.
Oh, I flipped it. I shouldn't have printed two-sided.
Exactly.
Teacher enrollment by gender over the last 10 years. So we'll take a look at females versus males. Once again, you can see I would say that the decline is continuous, right? It's like every year it's a little bit less students. It looks like we had a few more females. We had an uptake from 2019 to 2020, which is interesting. But in comparison to 2010, there's a decline in 3,813 students, as well as for males, a decline in 1,488. So the decline has been consistent over the years. Next slide. The next chart that we are looking at is completers by ethnicity and race over the last 10 years. If we take a look at the white non-Hispanic, there were approximately 561 fewer completers. But the teachers of color was primarily static, right? It's very slight increase in Black non-Hispanic, slight increase in Hispanic, a bit of a decrease in all others. But what I want to bring to your attention is comparing the total number of enrolled by the total number of completers. I mean, we've got in 2020-21, and I didn't do the math here, and I'm sorry I missed that when I was going over these slides, but just at a glance, we've got about 3,000 students completing. But if you looked at enrollment, we go back 4 years. It's slide 15. If you go back to enrollment, you'll see that we are having many fewer students are completing than enroll into teacher preparation programs. And so we need to have conversations about what these barriers are to completion.
But you need to take and put how many vacancies were listed in school districts, so you can see the huge gap that you have.
Good point, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
So vacancies, enrollment, and completers.
Yeah, so we'll have to get the vacancy data. We at the Board of Regents, we don't track those data, but we can certainly talk to some of our HR departments, possibly I'm not sure if the Department of Education tracks vacancy data, but we can certainly look to that as well, Mike. Thank you so much. Not sure what slide I'm on right now. I can't.
19.
Thank you.
And let me thank Sandy Holloway for joining us as well. Great to have you with us.
So if we look on slide 19, these are our completers by gender. You can see about 400 fewer females and 100 fewer males when we're comparing. What it looks like to me is we're staying between 2,000 and 2,500 completers on a yearly basis. There is a slight decline over the course of over the years, but it looks like we're completing about 2,000 a year, 2,000 females, so about 3,000, I would say. Next slide. This again just compares for you the percentage distribution of teacher completers by race and ethnicity. So you'll see here from 2011-12 to 2021, you'll see that there is in Black, non-Hispanic, Hispanic of any race, and all others, we're seeing some slight increases. So we are putting some plans in place to increase the percentage of completers with teachers of color. But as you can see here, there's about a 30% difference in the completers of color in comparison to the completers of white, non-Hispanic. Next slide. So what I wanted to, this shows you kind of enrollment and completer trends over the course of 2011 to 2021. But I wanted to draw your attention very closely to the ethnicity in regards to completers. When we've got students who enroll in our programs, 73% of white students complete, whereas only 17% Black, 3% Hispanic, and 7% others are, we're able to see those completion percentage rates. So we've got to really identify what the barriers are for these teachers of color so that we can put practices in place that will help these teachers of color complete and finish their program. So at this point, I will transition briefly back to Dr. Reed.
Okay.
Unless you want me to shift right into Paula.
No, I think we have a few minutes, so I want to see if there are questions regarding the data. Mike?
Yes. You look at the drop in enrollment and stuff. I wonder how much of that has been caused by the minimum standards for admission that the colleges and universities implemented, and the increase in the required ACT score, which might have prevented some from even enrolling in college.
Okay, we'll take a note of that. I think the deans are up next, so we can ask them if what they know about that, and we can also do some further research on that, Mike. So thank you for that piece. Admissions impact. Other comments or questions?
Yeah, this is Barry, and I may be piggybacking on what Mike said earlier. But number one, it would be helpful, and maybe this is the same thing, to kind of know what our targets kind of need to be for completers. And I think that's maybe the gap he was talking about, but to see where we're really falling short in terms of what we need our numbers to be for completers and versus where we are. And the other thing is, and I don't know how you can quantify this, but y'all are in higher ed. I would think there's a certain amount of churning that goes on with any major that somebody chooses. And I don't know that one can make the distinction between just churning and people making their minds up just as they do in any field or major that they go in. Look, I know people that have gone from engineering into English or vice versa, whatever, with the issues that really kind of boil down to, the teaching profession per se. I don't know that we can, get that out, but I mean, I would expect there's a certain amount of people changing their minds with majors all the time. And I don't know how much that can be rooted out.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Barry. I think that, we can certainly look into that to see if there's some overall trends of students who change majors. I do think, however, in the teaching profession, you're not considered a completer unless you pass the Praxis exam and are certified by the Louisiana Department of Education. So there's an extra piece to it's, you don't just graduate and you're considered a completer. You're not considered a completer unless eligible to be certified by the Louisiana Department of Education. So I think there are some other steps to the teaching profession that other professions may not have, that I think we need to have discussions about.
And I'll say this, in answering a question that Mr. Irwin brought up, and I think it's probably going to be brought up by Dr. Calderon, is we really started to see a shift in the number of students dropping the education program when the year-long residency came into play years ago. That's probably the major driving force that has caused traditional students to get out of traditional education programs and shift into alternate programs like the Louisiana Resource Center for Educators, or iTeach, because of that year-long residency where they don't make any money. That, in my world, has been the biggest detractor for students staying in education programs.
Got it. Thank you.
So Barry, and essentially, I think what Bruce is alluding to is someone could earn a degree in another area, become the teacher of record, the very next year be hired in a district on a practitioner teacher certificate, and then enter an alternate certification program, be paid the full teacher salary while they're in their practitioner teacher program. And so they drop out of colleges of education, get a degree, whether that be general studies or something else, get hired by a district, become the teacher of record, be paid the full salary while they're doing their alternate certification. So we've got other issues happening that they're not just Praxis, not just year-long residency, the mechanism in place for alternate certification. And I'm certainly not being critical of any alternate certification programs. If we had enough teachers, we wouldn't need alternate certification programs, right? So, but I do think that it is another factor. So, and I think that is getting at what, Bruce, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I think that is one of an unintended consequence and it could possibly impact enrollment in teacher preparation programs.
Yeah,
Do you think the group would have data on that? Would that be each college of education, or Susanna, do y'all collect that? How could we see the data on students who enroll in an education program and then switch that last year and go into an alt cert pathway? Do we know how we would get that?
we can talk about it. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about it offline. That's not something the Board of Regents collects, because we just collect the end when they're done. So we can certainly talk about that.
But I think the point is a good one. Landscaping the environment and the interventions or the issues that are impacting enrollment to completion. I think we absolutely want to make sure we take note of all of those.
One quick thing.
Yes,
It's a question too. I understand, and y'all can correct me again if I'm wrong on any of this, but there's sort of a pre-praxis that students take early in their enrollment, and my understanding was maybe that is an obstacle because they have a difficulty there. Could y'all elaborate on that, or if I'm totally wrong, tell me.
No, that's what they call, Barry, they call the Praxis core. To be eligible to enter a teacher preparation program, there is the Praxis core or a certain score on the ACT, the SAT, or possibly a person with a master's degree who might be wanting to come back and get certified to teach. And so that these students enter as freshmen, and they might be pre-educator students before they can enroll in the College of Education courses. And any deans, correct me if I'm misspeaking, they have to have a certain score on the Praxis core or a 22 on the ACT. I believe that's the number. I don't have the SAT memorized. Yeah. Does that clarify it for you?
Yeah. Now, maybe that's something else to look at. I'm not sure, but that does help me. Yeah.
Great.
Any other questions before it says 1100 SAT.
Thank you,
Richard. And thank goodness for being farsighted.
Yes.
I can read it.
Can't see that.
Any other questions before we transition to the deans? It's a great discussion, absolutely great discussion. Okay, so next on the agenda is the recruitment practices and recommendation for the deans of Louisiana's colleges and universities. They are already on, so they know that you have questions about the impact of admissions, et cetera. And so I'm sure they'll weave those into the comments that they make for us. We have Dr. Paula Calderon, who serves as the president of the Louisiana Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. She is a task force member, as you know, and the dean of College of Education at Southeastern. Joining her is Dr. Nathan Roberts, dean of College of Ed, UL Lafayette, representing the UL system. Dr. Peoples, dean of College of Education, representing the Southern system from Southern Baton Rouge. And Dr. Neil Matthews, director of School of Education at LSU Baton Rouge, representing the LSU system. And Dr. Michael Hicks, the assistant professor, College of Education at Centenary, representing Lakeview, our private colleges and universities. So delighted to have a full set of deans with us. We heard you. You said you wanted to hear from more of the deans. So Dr. Calderon, can I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to have my fellow deans right here on the camera with me. And since the task force hears from me probably more than they would like, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues and let the deans representing the 4 different systems speak. And then if we have any questions or if I need to wrap anything up, I'm happy to do that as well. So if I can turn it over to Dr. Nathan Roberts, that would be wonderful.
Thank you very much. And I'll start my timer so I don't go over. I'm honored to represent the UL system, although I do want to note, while we are a large producer, there are a lot of universities in the system and they're all unique and have great things to add. So I'm speaking primarily from the point that we've addressed. I'm very fortunate. We had our CAPE advisory board met this summer, and that's our accreditation group from nationally. And we had asked them questions on that fall right in line with what you're looking at. We asked them for ideas on how to better implement recruiting. We asked them how to recruit diverse candidates. We asked them what the current initiatives in schools were to retain teachers. And we asked them how we can better support teachers in the field. So they provided some of this information that I've got. And a lot of this information is what we hear on a regular basis. And keep in mind, it's what we hear from our students and from others. It's not necessarily what I did. And you can correct us if it's incorrect. And you'll hear at the end where some of this information I think has come from. The areas for improvement, which I will call the barriers, since our accreditation and others always look at our areas for improvement. What we tend to find so often, and as mentioned here, was the societal perception of the profession. And there are some things we can do about it. The problem is they are being talked out of being teachers. From everywhere that you just said earlier, they're being hit with that. And the worst story was a parent who came and apologized to me at orientation one day because he had talked his daughter out of being an educator and had refused to pay for her to go to college if she was going to be a teacher. And she wanted to be one anyway. So she went to school, became a teacher. And he said, I went and watched her teach one day and I made the biggest mistake ever. He said, she's a great teacher. This is what she should be doing. This is phenomenal. And he was bringing his other daughter to get into our teacher prep program. and it made an impact to him, but that's just one person. And that's what we're fighting all the time, is people telling them not to be a teacher, including existing teachers. When our teachers go out in the field, I've asked principals to please help us. Don't discourage them, because this is your future. So it is coming out a lot. And what we're getting a lot of this is the negative that comes into teaching profession. And Mr. Chafin's right on almost everything. He hit it with that. We are hearing that because of the media and societal things, and they are being all grouped together as to this negative side that comes to them. And a lot of it, they fail to mention that it's beyond the control of the teacher. People in the world think everything is the teacher, that it's 100% the teacher in the classroom that makes the difference. Well, they are a big component in the classroom, but there are hundreds of factors outside of the classroom that impact teachers and the student. And that never comes into play. It's if a child doesn't do well, it's got to be that teacher's fault. And so there are lots of things we need to address, but teachers feel that because they're getting blamed for everything in society right now and why people aren't succeeding. And that hurts us in our recruiting. The mandates that come down, teachers feel like they don't have a voice with all the things they're being told to do. And they need to have a voice because they're the best ones to tell you how they could do it, if that's the appropriate thing. But they feel like they're being told by people who are not educators what they should be doing in the classroom and how they should be acting. And it's so much beyond just teaching that they're being mandated to do that they feel like it's too much. Part of that is the inability to teach. And that's where we're trying to rebrand our profession. They feel like they're not being allowed to do the profession they got into. And some of the examples they run into is scripted curriculums that tell them this is the only way you can teach. This is exactly what you have to teach. And they're not able to get beyond that. And what I like to reference that to is there's no freedom to be a great teacher. And we don't do that to surgeons. We don't do that to attorneys. We don't do that to ship captains. When they get out, they have all the skills, but they take each individual situation and apply it the way they've been taught and how to use in that particular situation. And teachers are not allowed to do that so often. They're told you have to do it this way. This is the only part. And I say, well, why did I become a teacher? So we're losing those people because their inability to do the great profession that we prepared them to do. There is a lot of discipline issues. A number of those that are stepping in, they can't take care of the discipline in their classrooms, and they need more help to be able to do, again, to teach. The constant changes that show up make it very difficult for them to keep teaching because they're always being told to do something new, and they don't get the full support to do it. Why does this come up? And I just want to throw this out there. You've all heard of the whisper game, and I think that's what happens so often in this, whether it's the federal government or it starts with Bessie, and then it goes to the State Department, and then it goes to the school districts, and then it goes to the principal. And by the time the teacher hears it, it may not be what Bessie intended. It may not be exactly what the board intended because they aren't able to take care of that in there because it's changed over time. So what can we do with all these real quickly? We have the Educator Rising that a lot of chapters are looking at to try to get into the schools early to convince them to be teachers. We are starting in the K-12 school systems. We're having job fairs and we're rebranding the education. We realize we maybe were weak in one of our early courses. So we're putting our best course first to try to encourage people to stay teachers. That's where some of them drop out after that first course. So I think with diverse teachers, we need to get more people out recruiting who are diverse. They need to hear from more men why it's a great field to be in instead of hearing from somebody else. So we're working in that field to get in there. We need to work on the pay, which is something the legislature is going to have to do because other fields have increased in pay over years and the teaching profession has not been correspondingly paid what they do. The final one is the working conditions, which I think we have to make some hard stances that need to be changed for those working conditions. We have to stop placing the brand new teachers into the hardest schools. It makes it so difficult for them to succeed when they're thrown into the toughest schools in their very first step. We need to reduce the teaching load of those teachers in the very beginning and give them solid opportunities to catch up. They need a week break in the middle where they're not teaching doing else so they can catch their breath, have someone else teach their classes, get them caught back up so they don't just quit. Most of them say they can't even come up for air. And the last one I'm just going to throw in there is to quit giving them more tasks as a way to make them better and give them a paid mentor teacher from the state who pays money to help supplement the salary of a great teacher who will become their mentor to really help them learn all these things and help them with their lesson plans. If they get that great support, we won't lose them in those first years. But we're not getting that support early. It's just everybody has a great plan for mentor teachers and recruiting, put them in there. But when it comes to doing it, it's different all over the place. And I think paying to get the very best mentor teacher to do the work extra would be a big benefit. And that's coming from our system. We really appreciate y'all giving us a chance. I would talk all day on this and tomorrow also if you gave me the chance. But that's just to get us rolling on it. Thank you so much, Dr. Collerum.
Excellent. Thank you, Nathan. We took a lot of notes. There's no freedom to be great teachers. Definitely need great support early on. Love that you're rebranding and you're putting your best course first. Love all of
Love
that.
that.
Thank you very much.
Love that.
Paula, who's next?
All right, why don't we go to Dr. Virginis Peoples from the Southern University System.
Thank you, Paula, and good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to discuss our recruitment strategies and recommendations to increase enrollment in the Southern University system. The steep decline of individuals entering the profession is deeply concerning. And as you can see from the information that was shared earlier about the research, we all have a reason to be concerned. I feel like the song from Cheers is appropriate now, which says, I want to go where everybody knows my name and all our problems are the same. I think that's where we are in teacher education. We have likeness in our efforts to recruit teachers. Research tells us that one reason for this decline is connected to declining overall interest in the teaching profession. So we have implemented early recruitment strategies in high schools to reignite the interest of becoming a teacher and also to address the requirements needed to enter the teacher education programs that are often barriers to the entry into the profession. Our most promising recruitment strategy is focused on comprehensive early pathways for recruiting teacher candidates in high schools. And as you know, the early pathways are geared toward high school students to introduce young people to the teaching profession. And I will speak just very briefly about some of our initiatives that we have done at Southern University for recruiting teachers and candidates in high school. The early pathways are geared toward high school students, as I said, and one of the ones that we are using through the Louisiana State Department of Education is to Grow Your Own program. It's the Pre-Educator Pathway. It was instituted with local high schools and local school districts in conjunction with our dual enrollment programs at Southern University. And in this program, qualified students are allowed to take required teacher education lower level courses that are taught by college professors and are provided opportunities to participate in on-campus activities. Another program that we have for recruitment is called the SHEO Project, and this is the State Higher Education Executive Officers Project. It is an early pathway program that was instituted and focused on the recruitment of minority males starting in 10th grade. This was a 3-year pilot project in which 4 HBCUs from across the nation were allowed opportunity to recruit at least 10 aspiring to be teachers, high school minority male students in the 10th grade to participate in the project. Southern University was a participant in that project, and the program produced 6 young men last year to enter our teacher education program. We also have instituted the Educator Rising program, which is an early pathway, a national membership organization for aspiring teachers in high school that is instituted to make a case for teaching as a viable and rewarding future career choice and to provide opportunities for high school students to practice skills and dispositions that will help them become high quality educators. We partner with school districts and participants are invited to graduation activities at the university because we want them to begin with the program with the end in mind, and that is to graduate. So we let them participate and be a part of our graduation activities. The School of Education has joined the New Schools of New Orleans in an HBCU collaborative project called Pathways to Teaching. This is an early pathway project designed to specifically recruit high school students of color for teacher education programs by providing hands-on classroom experience and transferable college course credits in education. The project is in partnership with local schools and universities and other colleges in the state that are involved in this project, or Southern University in New Orleans, Xavier, Delgado, and Grambling State University. The founder of the program, Dr. Margareta Bianco, is helping to organize the project. Pathways to Teaching is an innovative teacher academy program designed to address teacher shortages and increase the racial diversity of the teacher workforce. The School of Education has partnered with the Outlook University Independent School Network called the Ozan Equity Center Project. And this early pathway project has proposed to establish many schools of education in high schools across the nation, specifically in Milwaukee, Nevada, Mississippi, and California, in an effort to increase the number of students enrolled in and participating with colleges of education across the state. Another strategy for recruitment is in the area of service scholarships and forgivable loans. According to research, the high cost of college combined with teachers' expected low salaries has contributed to a steady decline in enrollment in teacher preparation programs over the past 10 years and a shortage of qualified teachers in communities across the country. Therefore, the following strategies are utilized to help with the cost. Our students participate in the Federal Teacher Education Assistance for College and Higher Education program, which is called the Teach Grant, as you know. It provides scholarships for up to $4,000 a year for prospective teachers. Last year, we applied and were accepted to participate in the Federal Work Study Experimental Project. That provided funds for service in teacher education in the areas of student teaching, year-long residency, and field experiences. And through this program, teacher candidates can use hours spent in the field for work study hours and get paid for services and time spent in schools in the areas of student teaching, residency, and field experiences. The Southern University Foundation also provides scholarships for our qualified candidates, and we have a group called Friends of Teacher Education that have donated funds through the Southern University Foundation to assist with the cost of Praxis exams for teacher education. We also have School of Education fundraisers, and through this initiative, we provide support for Praxis assistance. We have the Thurgood Marshall scholarships and the LIGO scholarship grants for science teachers. We also use media campaigns and in-house recruitment strategies. We have a program called Each One Recruit One program, and it is an in-house initiative where we ask all faculty members in the School of Education to reach back to their high schools and hometowns to recruit just one student per year to become a teacher. And our media campaign rides on the back of the state campaign, Be Irreplaceable, Be a Teacher. We do all this, and our efforts are not all in vain, but there is still a need to do more. Beyond the recruitment of future teachers, we are focused on retention. And during the first year on campus, they are introduced to the teaching profession through a course called Seminar in Education. And through this course, they are introduced to Praxis help sessions and other information to help them to become successful in the program. The School of Education has seen early progress in its comprehensive efforts, but still there's more to be done. At our college-wide freshman convocation on last week, I asked the number of anticipated majors in teacher education to stand. We had about 25% of the audience to stand, but when I asked the question, how many of you have made a 22 on the ACT or 1100 on the SAT? No one raised their hand. What this means is our students are coming to us not adequately prepared, meeting the requirements for entering our teacher education programs. This means we have a lot of work to do in that 1 year to try to get them in. But during that time, you have other colleges that are recruiting and they are able to go to other places. So we lose a lot of students that really came to college wanting to be a teacher, that really had that concern and care for children to become a teacher, but they get there and they do not meet the qualifications, they can't get in. As someone has stated earlier, you know, our qualifications for getting into our teacher education program is that you must have a 22 on the ACT, or if you do not have the 22 on the ACT, we must prepare you to pass Praxis 1, as well as the 1100 on the SAT is a requirement. When our students enter our programs and when they make the ACT score, then they usually go on and do well in the PLT and the content area. Those are areas that we teach in the School of Education. The general education components of Praxis, the components of Praxis are usually general education components because that's reading, writing, and mathematics skills that they are working on. And so we lose some students at this point because they go on to major in other areas that they feel like, number one, they can make more money doing, and then they have time to get with other people on the campus in order to talk about other programs, and so we lose them. So our efforts, in our efforts to recruit them early, we do talk to them about and provide resources to help them with ACT and Praxis prep, but many of our students do not meet the requirements. You know, the average ACT score in Louisiana is a 18, but in order to enter our teacher education programs, they must have a 22. And so I see raising your hand. I'm gonna just stop right there. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, Virginia. I love what you're saying, but we've got to move on.
Right, I know.
No, there's a lot of there. I love all of the information. Bruce, can you wait until we hear from the others, or do you have a quick
Absolutely.
question?
Oh,
Okay,
no, let's give them all a chance.
okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Peoples.
Yes.
Okay, let's see.
Neil, you're up next.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank the task force members, the co-chairs, Commissioner Reed and Irwin, and anyone else that was in the legislature that had anything to do with this HCR 39. It's absolutely a brilliant insight into what I consider a really major crisis in Louisiana. Maybe not today, but 10 years, well, it is today, but 10 years from now, if we keep on doing what we're doing, as an old LSU coach said, you're going to keep on getting what you're getting. So we've got to change things. I'm using the word along with some other colleagues that we need a transformational thinking to enter into this. So I've been asked to very briefly talk about some strategies that LSU is using. I didn't have enough time to survey my other LSU colleagues, but I think they probably share in most of it, and most of what I'm going to say you probably you've already heard of, and then also talk about some barriers. First of all, I just want to say that at LSU, we've always had a Bureau of Ed research. We had a few years when it wasn't funded. It's been brought back by Dr. Eugene Kennedy and Dr. Richard Baker. I'm ready. I guess I should say it this way. My tank is empty when it comes to just believing that students are going to show up and prepare to become educators. We're in the preparation business, but sometime about 4 or 5 years ago, I began to lose a lot of what I call the believing, understanding that students were going to come to LSU, they'd enter the LSU College of Education or School of Education in their sophomore year, and we'd have 700 or 800 of them. I'm embarrassed to admit we're not even close to that number these days. So one of the things we've done is we're working with at least one parish under discussion with another about a summer program, kind of the equivalent of bringing them onto our LSU campus, talking to them about the profession of education, what it means, how encouraging them to teach, believing that teaching is a respectable profession, because we know very well coming out of high school that we're fighting a huge headwind of attitude that going into teaching would be a complete disaster. And if you want to really look at that, make sure you check out the secondary education completers at LSU, because we are a down-sloping curve that would make a ski jump look great, quite frankly. So I'm ready to do some things differently at LSU. We're going to, again, as I say, the first one out is East Baton Rouge Parish, where hopefully we'll bring about 50 students on campus this coming summer of 2022, and basically spend a lot of time talking about what a profession means. Somebody asked that, I think Commissioner Reed asked that question. A profession has independence of judgment. It has accreditation standards. It has standards in basically the training, and it's recognized by others through certification and accreditation. We are a profession. However, we don't exactly pay that way anymore, which is sometimes beyond the scope of our colleges and schools to get involved in, but having others believe. The other thing that we need to change at LSU is I want control over these students from the day they hit the campus with direct admissions into our School of Education. If I wait around to the sophomore year till half a dozen other counselors talk them out of going into the School of Education, I've lost at least 2/3 of who I should be probably educating in this. So we're going to look at direct admissions into our elementary program first. Hopefully we can get more and more chapters started by all of our state colleges and universities at Educational Rising, and to begin to teach and reach out to our students very, very, very early. I know that there in Louisiana today, rural parishes where half of their teachers in the classroom is in front of students are either not certified or they're teaching out of field. So we're going to make greater use of the online capabilities that we have in many of our other schools around LSU. So we'll probably start out with our elementary group. I've charged our faculty with figuring out what to do with elementary online certification and see if we can expand this, expand it a great deal so we can increase that productivity. Elementary, early childhood, special education, these are all areas that we know very well that we need to change. As far as barriers, let me start at it this way. I asked one of my colleagues, Dr. Richard Baker, to tell me in the last 10 years how many policies that have been shifted at the highest level and passed by BESI members. And I think we came up with like 500. So my next question to Dr. Baker was, and how many of those have affected teacher preparation programs? So I think someplace in the neighborhood of about 18 to 20 directly affect what we do. I'm not certain I could pass a final exam on what this has meant to us if you were to ask me in detail. It's just now obvious to me that a lot of these, what I call unintended consequences, are having a major effect on why we basically are not being able to recruit teachers. Residency, full-year residencies is one of them. I'm not against residency. That's traditionally what we call our post-baccalaureate programs. But for undergraduates, I dearly hope the task force takes a look at 18 policy shifts over the last 10 years and ask yourself a simple question. Did this reach the goals that we intended? Did it go the other way? And decide whether in effect this policy is worth keeping, altering, changing in some way. So I know our Office of Educational Research that we will put more money into in the next couple of years are going to be looking at the unintended consequences of policy shifts from the BESI members to find out whether in effect it's helping our business in recruiting or not. Secondly, I think it's probably high time to look at other ways to try to figure out how to encourage teachers to particularly go into rural parishes. I'm familiar with at least a couple of states that shifted their tax laws only slightly to allow any educator that worked in a parish where more than 50% were not certified to basically get tax relief from the state to basically teach and work in that as long as they worked in that particular parish. So there are ways that we should probably be really, really what I call innovative in the way we encourage our next generation of teachers going into the classroom. So I know I'm out of time, so thank you very much. I hope this conversation can continue. I'm very, very much pleased to be a part of this group today to talk about some of the things that we're doing and some of the barriers. So again, I'll come back to, I hope this task force will look at every single policy that got changed in the last 10 years and ask the question, did it basically help us or hinder us in encouraging a greater number of individuals going into education? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matthews. We appreciate that. Let's see.
So our next up is Dr. Michael Hicks from Centenary.
Good afternoon, everybody. Certainly, I want to first off just echo Dr. Matthews' comments and thanking the commissioner and the task force and all parties who have assembled today for bringing their time and attention to this subject. I don't know if I can say it any better than Dr. Roberts or even Dr. Peoples. We know what the strategies and the barriers are, and so when Dr. Calderon asked me to speak and represent the private universities across the state, of course, you all know that our private colleges are diverse in size and in areas that they serve. But I want to just be very brief and talk a little bit about some of the strategies and barriers. And so first off, I'd say, with Dr. Calderon's leadership and our new incoming president, we at Centenary have gotten a lot of ideas and energy just from our LACD colleagues. For our colleagues and deans to come together and talk about what's working in other areas of the state, I think has helped invigorate our recruiting program. I think if one of the positive things that came out of our class measures accreditation visit last year, it was that it gave us a real opportunity to look at some of the recruiting strategies that we were employing and to try to tweak that. So working with our colleagues, I think, is a very strong benefit. For example, Dr. Matthews, this evening, one of your colleagues at the Shreveport campus, Dr. Tracy Burrell, has invited me to participate in a community talk show on our local talk radio station, where we're going to talk about the profession. We'll be both, being drum majors for our individual programs, but that's what uplifting the profession looks like, to go back to a previous point. So working together, I think, is one point I want to say that we here at Centenary use as a strategy. Another thing is, and I'm not going to step on her feet because I know she's going to speak in a minute, but we've just taken a all-in approach to working with our school district. The district that we serve here in Shreveport is Caddo Parish. And Karen, Cassie, and Patisse, Dr. Karen Peace is on this call, as a matter of fact. They are the teacher recruitment team of our district. And so Dr. Johnson and I have just pledged our full support. Dr. Johnson participates on the provider side, and I've worked with the ladies on some specific recruiting task force activities. And so just our belief in our work with our partnership with our local, our LEA, I think is a strategy that we're going to continue to employ. Lastly, I would say owning who we are. We have a 4-credit system here at Centenary, and the year-long residency has made it, more difficult from an undergraduate perspective. And I don't want to beat that horse, but the data suggests that, or the data is very telling. It doesn't suggest the increases in programs you are seeing on the alt-cert side. And so with our MAT program, we own who we are. Some of the best teachers in both Caddo and Bossier parishes who've matriculated in our MAT program are some of the most thoughtful, dedicated educators in our area. And so we don't wear the jacket of being education stepchild. We're proud to take second career folk and folk who have made a decision, particularly in this time of during the pandemic, to go back into the classroom. And so we own who we are as alt-cert providers, and we're very proud of that. And I think that reputation, it spills out in our community. Also in strategies, we do some out-of-the-box things. Terry, can you just talk a little bit about some of the things we do here on this campus?
Sure. We reach around our community. We've reached out to Barksdale Air Force Base and tried to make some connections there with both the enlisted and officer force that are thinking about either going back in for an undergrad teacher prep program or a master's degree in our MAT program. So we've made some of those connections that have been very valuable as well.
Yeah, and so I know, as I said before, the diversity of the private colleges in the state is varied, and so we know that's not representative of everything that's being done. But I think we've heard a lot from those slides to the comments of my colleagues. Barriers. I don't think I can say it as enthusiastically as Dr. Roberts said it. But Dr. Roberts, I know that all of us, many of us here, felt that. We put our lives and we extend ourselves into the art and science of teacher preparation. And we carefully craft these caring adults to stand in classrooms across the state in that courageous role of teaching other people's children. And if the first encounter they get with the bureaucracy says, everything that we've done, forget that. You are a machine. You are an automaton. You are a robot. You are a Teach 2000. and check this list and check that list. It makes it extremely hard to continue to recruit the caliber of folk that we are fortunate enough to get in the classroom. Another barrier I'll mention, I'll turn it over to Terry, is that there's no clear state level help. There's no clear policy or financial benefit. And I know that they exist. What I'm suggesting is that there's no clear sticking benefit or help from the state in terms of policy or a direction of fiscal resources to help folk get into the profession. And I think we suffer from that. I think Dr. Matthews' brief history of BESI policies kind of alluded to that. But I think we can do better in that aim. Now, that's not representative, Dr. Calderon, of all the private schools. That's just coming from Michael Hicks. Dr. Johnson, would you like to add anything before we turn it back over?
Sure. Just a real quick thing. You know, I'm new to higher ed, having spent 25 years in Bossier schools as an administrator and a teacher. And the things that I have noticed in our profession is that, you know, I might be qualified for brain surgery because I've watched all 17 seasons of Grey's Anatomy. But I tell you, our public believes that they know everything a teacher needs to do and every much as bit as a teacher knows because they've been in school. And our teachers suffer that identity crisis, that lack of respect and deference to their professional preparation. And, you know, I've seen that as a principal in terms of the way parents will talk to teachers, the way the community will refer to teachers. And it's time, just like we pay for our if I see a police officer at Starbucks, I try to pay for their coffee. We need to do the same for teachers. We need to, teacher status, the sacrifice that teachers are making needs to be much better understood by the public and recognized from all levels of government and society. And I think that that teachers also I would echo the barriers of the Praxis test. And I think that if we can admit students to higher ed, we can admit those students into the classroom.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Very, very good points. All very good points. Thank you. Paula, is there anything? I know we're 2 or 3 minutes to go in this section. It's been very informative. Anything to wrap it up and sort of summarize the points from your perspective?
First, I want to thank my colleagues. I appreciate all of you taking the time to log on and to speak. There is a story, a rumor, that the Prime Minister of Germany was approached by engineers and doctors, and they wanted a pay raise, and they wanted to be paid the same amount as teachers. And this rumor has it that the Prime Minister of Germany said, why? Why should I pay you more than those who taught you? And that, even though that's a rumor, I just kind of want to throw that out there as elevating the status of a teacher and elevating the teacher. Why should we pay other professions more than the people who taught them and got them to those professions? And because it's come around a couple of times, elevate the teacher, elevate the status. And I figured that little anecdote sums up what we mean by elevating a teacher. And Dr. Reed, I know that there were some questions. And so if it's okay with you, I don't mind having a chance to answer some of the questions that anyone has for the deans who have just spoken.
Thank you. Bruce, I know you had a question.
I'm good right now.
Okay, great. Anyone in terms of questions? Obviously, we hear clear thematic information about early exposure, lifting the profession, removing barriers along the process. and making sure that we understand, as Dr. Matthews and others have said, what is the policy impact of sort of double-digit changes in this work, in the policy frame? What has that meant for moving the profession forward? There has been a lot of conversation about pay, although I will point out that we have in the stats a huge number of people who are enrolling in the profession, even knowing the pay, right? Because they want to give back. We want to make sure teachers are well compensated, but it's not just the pay, right? It's the value, it's the respect, and certainly the compensation is part of that. And so I want to make sure we're thinking about all the pieces and parts in this work, and really grateful for the deans who have joined us, because you're in the trenches, and obviously this task force will do its very best work. When we hear from practitioners and people who are in the field struggling with this every day, they will make sure that we are providing a report that is relevant and on point when it comes to the kinds of changes that should be considered as we move forward. So with that, we're going to go to our shyest member of our task force, Bruce Chapin.
How did I know who you were talking about?
Who never talks, who never has anything to say, who is just phenomenal. He, as you all know, he's on the task force. We're so happy to have him, and he's president-elect of the Louisiana Association of School Personnel Administrators, as well as the supervisor of human resources at Livingston Parish Public Schools. So Bruce, I'll let you take it away.
All right, I want to thank the task force. I want to thank the deans that just spoke, because we in the public education world could not do what we do without y'all. And we definitely appreciate each and every one of you, each of the universities that were represented here. I want to thank you for that. That's just a little bit about me. You can skip right over that. We're going to talk about three things: challenges in recruiting, challenges in retention, and where do we go from here? The one thing that scares me the most about what I'm hearing is this elephant that we're building in the room is no longer an elephant. It's more like a B-52 bomber. And we're going to have to figure out as a task force what areas we're going to tackle, because these issues that we're talking about are huge, and we can kind of get lost in the talking points. So I think we need to make sure that we don't lose our focus. And if you could go to the next slide for me. Challenges in recruiting. Let's talk about this just for a moment. Lack of numbers in certified graduates. I think you've seen the numbers from our university partners. This is one of those main issues. I'll use this for an example. We are fortunate to be sandwiched right between two amazing universities in LSU and Southeastern. Over the years, for whatever the reason, most of our new hires, we partnered with LSU or with Southeastern, and we got a lot of hires from Southeastern, some from LSU. You know, when I became personnel director in Livingston Parish 10 years ago, we would take 6 to 7 individuals to Southeastern, and we would interview potential candidates from 8:30 in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 people, 20-minute sessions, non-stop. In the last 5 to 7 years, that number has decreased substantially. This past spring, whether it was COVID or not, but this past spring, we did a virtual fair. We only had about 3 interviewers, and we only interviewed approximately 30. 95% of those were elementary. And so we have definitely seen a decrease in hard numbers coming out of the certified individuals in a 4-year program that are ready to step in the classroom and take over the job. The lack of rigorous preparation from alternate certification candidates. Again, I go from my experiences only. 10 years ago, we may, and this is a stretch, we may have hired 5 individuals coming out of the alt-cert programs that do an amazing job for what they do. LRCE and I teach. This year, I don't have the firm numbers, but I'm thinking we're probably going to be in the 50 to 75 range of alt-cert candidates that we had to hire this year. because we could not fill the openings that we have in the classroom with certified individuals. Rural school districts are struggling with this, with the distances from the university partners and with pay structure. So those folks even, they have greater challenges before them. There are a couple of small rural districts that their high schools have 0 certified teachers. We have to do something to help out with those rural school districts. Now, there's an issue here that really doesn't have anything to do with recruiting, but it's something that this task force has to look at, and I've already brought it up once, is we have the mentor program. Right now, thanks to LDOE, there are waivers that allow the school level experts, the principals, to determine school level experts in their schools that have certain criteria that are considered mentors. And we have waivers for those individuals. 95% of our mentors in Livingston Parish, and we have to have 50 plus this year, are from that waiver. We very well know that those waivers are for 1 year. We're told multiple times from LDOE, excuse me, that those waivers are not going to be made permanent. If that happens, that is going to have an effect on this state like we haven't seen in a long time, because we are going to be very, very short on individuals that are required to mentor alternate cert individuals that come into our schools and our student teachers. We won't have enough. At that point, we will have to tell Southeastern and LSU, you're going to have to find someplace else to take your student teacher candidates or your residents, because we won't be able to service them. I am begging this task force, along with LDOE, to look at making those mentor waivers a permanent part of the process. If we could go to the next slide. Challenges in retention. This is something that's been brought up a little bit today. Stress placed on teachers from many different fronts. SLTs, for those that don't know what those are student learning targets. Every teacher that is being Compass observed has to have a student learning target. In other words, what percentage of my students are going to be required to grow for me to be an effective teacher? Now, I think it was Dr. Roberts, they have mentioned there are many factors that go into play of a student being successful throughout the year, whether that is something that happens at home or whether that is something that happens at school. There are many factors that determine whether that student and those SLTs are reached. Lesson plans, we can talk about that all day long about teachers are graded on lesson plans. If their verbiage is not right on a lesson plan, it comes off of their observation. To me, that makes absolutely no sense. Accountability. We are asking a lot of our teachers, which is nothing wrong with that, but we're not paying them for that. The old adage that our teachers, and most districts pay teachers from 177 to 182 days. That concept is that horse is long out of the stable. Our teachers are not 182-day teachers. I live with one. I have a daughter that's a teacher. They do not work 182 days. So why are we paying them 182 days and asking them to do 220-day work? We need to be bold and start looking at the MFP formula and the MFP funding for the districts. Not every district can afford to pay those teachers extra days. We need help from the state to be able to do that. So because of the stresses and strains placed on those teachers, we've got laws that have been passed that ties the hands of the schools and the teachers on what they can do with discipline in the classroom. Because You may have a school that is amazing with student performance scores. Their scores are off the chart, but their suspension rate may be a little high. Well, that suspension rate can put them into a program where the state comes in and tells them what they're doing wrong. We've got to figure out, and this is something that I've been on my soapbox preaching, we've got to figure out a way to give our teachers back the classroom. That's us in the leadership roles. You folks that are on this task force with all of us, we have to look at a way to give our teachers back the classroom. We've got teachers in the classroom with PhD degrees that are being told, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing in teaching our children. Well, they have a PhD in education. That makes no sense to me. So we've got to figure out a way through looking at some of those laws that were talked about, some of those policies that were talked about just a moment ago, to give those teachers back the creativity. We send a teacher to a school for 4 years to get out of that school, to go into their first year of teaching, to hear, oh, you don't know what you're doing. You've got to say it this way. That scripted curriculum that was talked about by Dr. Roberts, I wanted to reach through the screen and high-five him, because the scripted curriculums, they tell the teachers exactly what to say. We can't do that because my students may be very different than what Dr. Roberts' students are that's teaching down the hall from me, or Dr. Peoples' children that are in another school in a low poverty or a high poverty district. So why should the curriculum words and verbiage be the same for all three of us when our students are very different? But that is exactly what is happening in the schools. I have a teacher in one of our schools right now that is a lawyer. She has a law degree that she is being told that you don't know what you're doing teaching a law studies class. Are we serious? She has the knowledge, but she's not using the right verbiage in her SLTs. And so she's being graded because her students aren't growing at 70%. We've got to figure out a way to fix that portion of it. Now, I will tell you that we've had to get very creative, and it'll be on the next slide. We are using a lot of different methods to get our jobs out there. We use Teach Louisiana. LDOE sponsors a great program on there where we can advertise jobs that go out nationwide. We do reach out and use that program from time to time. It has been helpful. I can't believe I'm saying this, but we do use Facebook. We use a program called Frontline Technologies Applicant Tracking. We use Twitter. We use the newspaper. We use word of mouth. I'll put on a sandwich box and stand out on the road if I have to. But it is becoming more and more difficult to recruit teachers that can step in the classroom right now and do the job. We can get those individuals from business and industry, but they do not have the skill set to step into the classroom and effectively teach your kids and my kids the way that we want them taught. It's unfair to that individual to even expect them to do so. One of the issues that, here's a question that I have for this task force. Why do we make it so easy for an individual to step in off the street that's not ready? They may end up being a good teacher, but is not ready to teach in a classroom, but we make it extremely easy. You may or may not be aware of this. If there's an individual in the workplace that has a 22 on the ACT, a 2.5 GPA, we can put them on a temporary authority to teach right now. They can walk into a classroom tomorrow, draw full teacher pay. We do provide them with a mentor, but we give them the keys to a classroom and say, good luck, and we'll help you along the way. Is that really what our kids need? But folks, it is time that we address the return to work laws. We've got retirees that are amazing teachers that will not come back to the classroom because if they make 25% more than their retirement, then their benefits are frozen. We've got to look at that archaic law and fix that law where a teacher, a retired teacher, until we get the university programs back on track and get our kids back in those programs, we've got to fix that, because if I have a chemistry teacher that is ready to walk into a classroom tomorrow and effectively take over a class where a teacher quits today, and she can pick up or he can pick up that class and begin teaching tomorrow and make it effective, why can't we use that? We've got that retiree return to work law that does not allow that to happen. Here are some recommendations. Allow for the permanent waiver to the mentor program. Review considering changes to the retiree return to work law. Look for creative ways to fund or encourage individuals to enter the teaching profession. Review the requirements of the Praxis exams across the board. There is a change coming to the high school math Praxis. And I mentioned this to one of our other, in our first meeting, the high school passage on the Praxis exam currently is 22%. Middle school is 44%. That is unacceptable. We've got to figure out a way to allow to examine those tests. Let's look at what's being asked. Let's look at the passage score requirement. Our current math is 10 points higher than the national average. Social studies was that way until a few years ago. We fixed that with a partnership with LDOE. We cannot do what we do without our university partners. In the past 3 or 4 years, I've seen us coming together because we all have the same problem. We have to work with our policymakers, Bessie, the legislators, university partners, school district personnel to give teachers and districts back the classroom. That is so very, very important. Next slide, please. That's my contact information. I will be glad to come and talk to anyone. As Dr. Reed so eloquently put, I am not afraid to talk about these issues. There are huge issues that we have to address. We have to look at this elephant that we're building and figure out what is the most important thing right now to get kids back in our universities. The alt-cert programs are an amazing tool right now, and we thank God for them. But we have to get our students back in the university programs. The STAR programs that we used to have, I'll say it like Mr. Pope always says it, back in the day. The STAR programs that encourage students to get into education. We've got to get those back in the schools. We've got to get our teachers back loving being teachers. And the only way we're going to do that is to take some of this stuff off of them, allow them the creativity, allow them to use the curriculums the way that they know best for their kids. And next slide, please. That may be the last one. But guys, do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to sit down with anybody that wants to talk about this. And Dr. Reed, I promise I'll be quiet.
No, you won't. And we don't want you to, Bruce, but thank you very much for the information and clarity of purpose and thought in the information. Again, we're really grateful. We know, as has been said, this is complex. Understanding and landscaping the opportunities and the challenges is the work at hand for this task force, and all of the information shared is certainly going to help us. Bruce, I think your recommendations really are solid and obviously nested in the good work that you are continuing to do. And as I was listening to you speak, I thought about what Dr. People said. It's like cheers, right? We're all, everybody knows your name and the challenges are the same. So we definitely want to make sure that we're harnessing our focus to make sure we have phenomenal teachers in our classroom. Let's see, are there any questions for Bruce? I think we're just exactly on time, which has been great. There's a lot of discussion about alt-cert and our regular path. I want to make sure that we learn more about that, but I think Dr. Karen, Dr. Peace, yeah, I'm trying to read it from here. Did you have a question or comment?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to add on to what Bruce was saying. When we look at Praxis, I also would like for us to make sure that we're looking at, as a state, reciprocity between certification requirements in neighboring states. We often have trouble with people, particularly coming from Texas, because they have a different requirement than Praxis of young applicants who have just completed requirement for certification in Texas, then coming to Louisiana only to find out that to get out of an out-of-state license, they're going to have to take more Praxis exams. So that tends to be a barrier that we look at. So I just wanted to bring that back to the table.
We captured that note. Thank you very much. Any other comments?
Yeah, I just want to make the comment. When we talk about alt-cert, you know, there's a spectrum involved. And so when I talk about alternative certification, I say that to others, but in-house, really, I'm talking about our MAT, our master's program. And so, yeah.
Right.
And I know that those are two different concepts in people's minds, but our alternative certification here is part of our master's program. So I just want to say, as you talk about operationalizing that term, it can mean different things to different people. And so I think that's important.
No, thank you for that clarification. And what I have heard, and again, I think I'm probably in this room the only non-educator, but I am a student. I am a young person who, as a student, had parents who said, not that profession, right? So we have many former educators in this room, in our conference room today. And so I do want to make sure we differentiate between what we've heard, which is strength of the alternative certification program, bringing people into the profession, and the question about parity or lack of parity in the qualifications and requirements for a pathway of a regular program versus an alternative certification program. And I think that's what I'm hearing in differentiating the issues here. Accurate?
Accurate.
Okay, I'm trying to catch up. So thank you for that. Other points of clarification before we hear from Dr. Craig and M. LeBlanc Cooper? Thank you guys for hanging in. I know this is a long Zoom, a lot of good content, but we have a short runway for our first report. So we want to make sure we do as much as we can. Say grace, as my grandmother says, say grace over as much as we can as possible.
Dr. Reed?
Yes.
The universities can only do so much. And they all realize that there's an issue. But until we get the universities and the Department of Education working together and addressing these requirements, addressing these laws, addressing retirees' return to work, we're going to be spinning our wheels.
Yes.
There has to be better coordination, more realistically looking at the issue that we're facing and undo some of the stuff that has been done.
Thank you, Mike. That's a good transition to this presentation, which is a department and regents presentation as we look at what we need to do. But you're absolutely right. The collaboration has to be deep. It can't be one-offs. And we have to really, I think, be willing to analyze what's the impact of the work that we've done. And have we helped or have we hindered our big goal of producing more great teachers? So, Dr. Craig, can I turn it over to you?
Yes. Next slide. Just wanted, my team and I got together based on the results of our survey, looking at our data and looking at the results of your responses to the survey that we sent out. And we've really come up with potentially 5 major recommendations to have a positive impact on recruitment into colleges of education. One of the things that we'd like to do is connect with other states that have implemented teacher recruitment programs. We want to see how they have been funded, how they have partnered with their department, their colleges of education, and how they have connected with members of business and industry to support teacher preparation programs. In addition, we would like to partner with the Department of Education so that we can review best practices for recruiting teachers before entering college. Our pathways, the new Pre-Educator Pathway in high school, which is new within the last year, is an excellent next step towards that. We'd like to research the feasibility of teacher loan forgiveness programs or possible additional incentives for teachers who teach in a content shortage area, for instance, special education, science, or math. And we'd like to look at it from a state perspective, but also a local perspective. For instance, if you're in a rural area, and Mike has mentioned this several times before, that there's a high school in a rural area that has 0 certified teachers in that school, that certainly is a shortage area. We want to encourage expanded partnerships with our colleges of education and local school districts, focusing specifically on recruitment, and work with the Department of Education to create a pipeline of teachers of color in teacher preparation programs in order to target those high-need school districts in Louisiana. So this is just some very general recommendations. We will shift now to M. Cooper and the Department of Education's recommendations.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I just wanted to, on the next slide, just recap what we talked about at the last meeting. So I went through several national best practices or things that are working really well in other states aligned to the areas of recruitment, recovery, and retention. And so in the recruitment area, we talked about, as we've all shared on this call, early exposure for high school students being a best practice across the country, financial incentives, and residency programs. We have practices in 2 out of the 3 of these, which are pre-educator pathways that several people mentioned on this call, and then the residency program, which will be its first full year will be this year. So I wanted to jump into 10 recommendations that I've gathered on the next slide that starts with the foundational recommendation. So hearing your feedback, concerns, just all of the issues we've been talking about from the last meeting and what we've been hearing in the field. This one in particular is going to set us on the right track for really understanding the issues and what is not happening in Louisiana. So if you remember last meeting, the majority of the questions that were asked in the legislation, we could not provide the data for either at all or in its entirety. And that was partially because of the lack of data collection. And so one of the recommendations that I have is to evaluate the current practices we have in place as far as data collection, and then create a plan for how to improve that. So with better data collection, we'll be able to identify the gaps and needs that we have, develop what improvements need to take place, and then really be able to drive decisions based on that data and monitor effectiveness of strategies. So a lot of what we're sharing is, our personal experiences in our districts or in our jobs. Sometimes we have people that collect data independently, but we don't have a statewide formal collection process on several of these things. And so my first recommendation is really to improve the data collection processes that we have. On the next slide, you'll see the next 9 recommendations. And these I pulled into categories based off of what we've been talking through. The first one is the expansion of the pre-educator pathway in our high schools. So this school year that we're in right now will be the first year of this. And we want to make sure that we are monitoring its effectiveness, improving it, and ideally every high school in the state has this pathway as part of their program. The second one is a strategy around recruiting diversity in the workforce. So as you saw earlier, Dr. Craig had the same recommendation here. I think our 2 agencies, along with several groups in this task force and on the call today, can help with that. The third piece is around the Human Resources Fellowship that we piloted last year. And I talked a little bit about this in our July meeting, but our support for human resources directors in the past has been mostly about administrative type tasks, certification, very administrative type things. And we'd like to move that support more into being the human capital leader of their district. And so we piloted a fellowship this past year where we had about 20 HR directors across the state in a year-long program to help them with recruitment and retention efforts. And so we'd like to expand that work. The fourth area that we've been hearing a lot on this call is to study and design a strategy around the barriers that exist for entering teacher preparation programs. We've mentioned several on this call related to Praxis and things like that. And I think this is an area that we definitely need to explore. The fifth area is to study the current model that exists, but also invest in this para to teacher model. So one of our high needs areas of certification across the state is in special education. We have been working with a model where paraprofessionals would enter a program in which not only would they become or receive a bachelor's degree, they would also be certified in special education, in turn giving them the opportunity to fill one of those spots for a special education teacher. We had about 130 paras in the program last year. We'd like to expand this model across the state to help fill that gap in special ed. The sixth area we talked a lot about last time, but also definitely trending on this call, is around this campaign to elevate the teacher profession. I shared with you all last time a couple of states who have done something similar to this, and I think that sparked some of the conversation last time. And I think one of the recommendations here could be not only to study the states who have done this really well, but help develop a campaign for what that could look like. The seventh piece is around supports for our current principals and people who want to become a principal. So this is important for a lot of reasons, but also they are the person at the school level who is leading human capital. So they are recruiting and retaining people at their own site. And so it's equally important that we support our principals in doing this work around best practices. The eighth item, and again, this aligns with what Board of Regents shared earlier, is around incentive and compensation models. So studying what works across the country, which we've done a little bit of that, but studying how this could work in Louisiana and what a plan could look like for those things across the state. And then the last area is around studying the effectiveness of our teacher residency model and the areas for improvement. So we've shared a couple of those on the call today. And so this first year, this school year is going into effect. And so we're already working on how do we study what's working, what needs to be improved for years to come. So Commissioner Reed, I'll see if anyone wants to add anything to that or if there's any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Em and Dr. Craig. So we tried to tease out recommendations based on the totality of the discussion today. Certainly we will send you the deck so you have some time. This is not a one and done in terms of comments, but if there are questions or comments or you don't see your particular opportunity item listed, please let us know either now or by email. Any comments? Does it look like we are covering the waterfront of the kinds of issues that you all expect us to take on in terms of recommendations?
I got a couple of questions, Dr. Reed.
Yeah, Mike.
Number one, we're not voting on these recommendations right now, correct?
Correct.
Need time to study. Number two, I think we need to expand. And I think Dr. Craig shared information from 2011 to 2021. I think we need to have every bit of legislation that was passed in the years 2011, 2021 that affected teacher certification. And I think we need to have a printout of the bulletins and the issues that deal with teacher certification. Because until we dig deep into legislation and policies and procedures that have been implemented, we're not going to solve this issue. We got school systems that have upwards of 89 to 90 teaching spots open. They can't find people. This is not something that we need to study and look at. This is something we need to dig deep, and we need to come up with a comprehensive plan as soon as possible. So I'm asking that those two items be done.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm adding that item, Mike, to the point you had before. So in terms of additional research, you asked for vacancies against enrollment and completion in the same timeline. So we've captured that. And then you additionally legislation and bulletins from that exact timeline.
Correct.
Okay. And then Janet, Dr. Pope, were there items for you? Did I cut her off? Was she trying to speak?
I thought so. There she is.
Sorry, you guys, I'm muted. I second everything that Mr. Falk has just said. I think it goes way, way deeper than this. We need to go back to the past where legislation started, policies also too, the policies that have changed since then. I know recently at the Bessie meeting, there were some other policies that changed in regards to certifications, and with everything else that was going on, it was really hard to pay attention to that too. I think we needed to take a look at what just passed with Bessie in regards to all of those changes. There were questions and concerns with the Ed Leader 1 and 2 and 3, which goes in the master teacher, into principals, and into superintendent. So I agree with Mr. Falk. We need to take a deep, deep dive into all of this and really go back in the last decade.
Got it. Thank you very much. Other items, other research items? Is it Parks?
Alex Gerald and I think Miss Cynthia Posey both have.
Who is it?
Thanks for putting, hey everyone.
Alex, yeah.
Thanks for putting the recommendations together. I think two clarifying questions. One is, I didn't see anything about the Praxis and how that's been a barrier, particularly for prospective teachers of color. And is that intentional? Is that something that we're not looking to rethink? And then the second question was, I saw that these were really targeted specifically for recruitment challenges. Is this intentional? Are we waiting then for the retention challenges? And I know that this happens on a continuum, but what's the process on that?
Thank you for both points. So the Praxis will absolutely be on the list. And we have recruitment, retention, and recovery. So we're going to talk about each item at a meeting and then talk about recommendations. And then have the totality of those.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that. Making sure we have Praxis on the list, which we do. And particularly as you stated, the impact on diversity of teachers as well. Who was the next person, Malin?
Cynthia Posey, I think, is logged in as Edward. I could be wrong.
Okay.
Correct me if so.
Ms. Posey? Has her hand up?
Unmuted and muted, but we're still not hearing anything.
Can you unmute? Okay, while she works on that, are there others? She says she'll email her comments. So, okay, no problem. Technology is good when it works. But we have many ways for you to get your message in, so not to worry. Other comments, other thoughts? Again, we're going to send this slide deck to you. We're going to ask you to take a look at that. If you can certainly flag additional research or additional questions that you have, so we can collect that information and we will bundle that and get that out to you as we prepare for the next meeting.
But I think the only thing that I would add is that, again, the focus of this meeting was recruitment. We are going to cover recovery and retention at the next meeting. And so we'll delve more deeply in retention at the next meeting. So more recommendations to come.
Okay, did we get the comments in the chat yet?
We have not yet,
Okay,
but
they're coming.
stay tuned.
So while we wait for that, are there public comments that we've received? Any public comments?
Yes, we've received one public comment from Dr. Leslie Blanchard at LSU, serves as Executive Director of Leadership Development Institute, and shared an article on teacher working conditions and retention from the American Education Research Association. So after this meeting, I will follow up with the PowerPoints from this meeting as well as the July meeting, and I'll also attach this article shared by Dr. Blanchard at LSU.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Blanchard. Is that the only public comment?
That is the only public comment at this time.
Okay. Finding my notes. All right, so my notes say that we have completed all the work of the day. And that we are going to move, thank you, to the information on next steps and next meeting. So we have 2 additional meetings on the books and work all in between. So you see here, we're asking you to save the dates for the September 23rd meeting, 1 to 3:30. And then the November meeting, obviously, we will in person if it's safe to do so. We'll be on Zoom if we need to make sure that we are not causing any safety concerns regarding COVID. So those are the dates we want to make sure that you have on your calendar. Is there any other information to come before the task force today? Hearing none. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? Nobody wants to leave.
Our motion we adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion from Bruce and a second from
Karen.
Peace. All right. So with that, again, thank you so much. The meeting is adjourned. Really grateful for the discussion today, and we look forward to hearing from you after you receive the deck and the article. Thanks again for joining us. Take care.